Hello everyone, Bag here. So, Tribbie, huh? The first thing that I want to say is that my opinion on her has changed since my evaluation on her in my last video, as she got hotfix buffed the day after the initial update that I covered. So, alongside the teammate tier list that you clicked on the video for, think of this video as also serving as an addendum to what I said there. This addendum is relevant to this tier list as all of these changes have an effect on who she works well with. So indulge me for a bit, and skip to this time if you just want the tier list. For those of you who have missed this whole Tribbie change fiesta, she first got nerfed from her base kit to where she is now only able to launch one follow-up per ally's ultimate, with this new restriction being reset every time Tribbie uses her own ultimate. After that, since that was effectively a nerf to the ground, she then got hotfix buffed to counterbalance the nerf, with a new addition to her third trace. Now, she gains 1.5 energy for every enemy hit by an ally. Think of this as literally just being half of the Herda's energy trace, because that's exactly what it is. This is a two-sided buff, as on one hand, this greatly helps her energy situation, making her first of all a lot less reliant on her light cone, and if she can spam her burst enough, then her previous nerf won't be nearly as bad for anyone but the most spammy burst spammers. But on the other hand, this further confines her into her AoE niche in order to be used efficiently. They essentially stunted her main strength and locked away her fix to that stunt into the AoE niche that she was already designed around. The takeaway from this buff is that she is now better at what she is already good at, while now also being a much better spammer of DDD, which at least partially lets us ignore this up and down rollercoaster of a beta and instead examine, well, what is Tribbie good at? Despite this nice buff, what we are left with is a very good unit in the damage buffing department, with probably the best AoE/blast damage amping in the game, but with very few units who actually want her over other options due to her lack of utility past just damage. She is by far the most restricted support right now when it comes to her optimal fight scenario, as a lot of her utility crumbles when against less than 5 to 3 enemies. She has universal buffs, but a restricted general use case. She is an odd unit for sure. The main gamble with her is if her buffs will support future characters better than the likes of Robin, but right now there is just really no way to accurately predict that. Anyways, getting back to the actual tier list, I'll first list out every carry that could feasibly use her, before noting other units who work well with her in any notable way. Please note that this tier list does not actually indicate how strong each individual unit is in the meta when using Tribbie, but rather just how much use Tribbie can get out of the carry, and how much use the carry can get out of Tribbie. So some weaker units will be placed higher than they normally would be. Alright, that's more prefacing than I usually do, I'm sorry. Let's get into the actual tier list. First off, let's go through the HP scalers. Mayday and Blade like her as a support very much, since her damage amping is essentially made for them. While her follow-up spamming Erudition-esque playstyle isn't exactly 100% compatible with them, their blast attacks and Blade's occasional follow-ups will still give her additional damage and energy some legs to stand on. Now, for both of them, she is not the most important unit to get, as Mayday's first and foremost support right now is Sunday for his action advancing and energy funneling, and Blade also really likes action advancers like Sunday or Bronya to fast forward his talent stacks and damage. As a secondary support, she is for sure very strong, and should compete very well against the likes of RMC, but she is by no means a must-have support for either of them. And in purely single target or dual target scenarios, she might be outclassed by RMC if they are very highly invested into with their relics. Next, let's talk about some of the units that got hit pretty hard by the follow-up attack nerf, Yunli and Argenti. Both of them previously benefited a lot from her spammy follow-ups thanks to their low-cost spammy ultimates. But now that synergy is basically gone. Even with her new energy trace, it's still just a lot less follow-ups than before, since in some scenarios like in Pure Fiction, Argenti and Yunli are just able to ult over and over again, more than any Tribbie could ever keep up with, no matter how good her energy is. Yunli still appreciates her general buffing past just her follow-ups though, since action advancing is not as important to Yunli as it is to other carries due to her parry playstyle, so it's not the end of the world if it's something that Tribbie lacks. The additional damage that Tribbie has onto the healthiest enemy also helps with Yunli's problem of overkilling ads with her Lightning Lord-esque big counter. Funneling single target damage from AoE damage is one of Tribbie's biggest strengths, and Yunli really appreciates it. Now, as will be said many times in this video, the gap between Tribbie in her optimal scenario and this carry's other best supporting options is not that high. While I do think Tribbie will be Yunli's best in slot support for AoE fights, it's not strong enough to where it will jump her multiple places in the meta, mostly because you are giving up the utility that other supports can bring, such as Sunday's energy funneling or the plethora of action advancers, again including Sunday. As well, it's not the end of the world for her not to have have action advancing, it is still something that Yunli likes to have for better energy gains and more attacks, which is always important in pure fiction. Still, in isolation, I would say that Yunli deserves to be in this top tier, but probably at the bottom of it. Argenti, meanwhile, also benefits from the single target additional damage, and having frequent AoE attacks is still a large synergy even without the follow-up attack spam. The name of the game with Tribbie has changed from spamming ultimates to spamming AoE attacks, and while Argenti now gets less from her, he still fits that bill for her all the same, so I will put him in the highest tier. But this is again the same context as Yunli, as foregoing energy generation and extra turns from one of your support slots is a trade-off to access Tribbie's uncontested damage amping. I'll say this for any exclusive pure fiction carry, but while Tribbie is obviously most of the time better in raw damage amping in this mode, the new team-wide buff in pure fiction that buffs your damage means that a lot of the time Tribbie's damage buff is overkill for these smaller mobs. Instead, there is still that quantity over quality aspect with attacks that has always existed within this mode, meaning that, you guessed it, multiple team-wide action advances will be more important. This, of course, depends on the exact team and rotation, but it is a general idea that you should at least consider. If you do want to play an atypical Tribbie build by playing her as a fast DDD spammer, then this comparison is a lot better in her favor. But I would say that for most players, that this is not how she is going to be played. Wait for my Tribbie guide where I will go into it in more detail, but essentially, a lot of Tribbie's personal damage can be sacrificed in exchange for substituting Robin's action advancing potential, at least in AoE scenarios that can properly funnel her ultimate. In my opinion, this is not a good trade-off most of the time, since Tribbie's personal damage is a large selling point of hers, and trying to emulate Robin will most of the time just be worse than actual Robin. But if you want to avoid the overkilling problem that I just talked about, then this is a solution, just not exactly an intuitive one. Off of the coattails of Yunli, there is also Clara to talk about. Clara is a bit less synergistic with Tribbie than Yunli, as she is a bit more energy hungry from her supports, and her attacks are either single target or blast attack, rather than either blast attack or AoE. Besides Clara's skill, of course, but that doesn't really level the playing field. Tribbie is still very good for her, but I wouldn't exactly call her a best in slot. Continuing on the discussion of nerfed teammate synergies, we have the Fei Xiao follow-up squad. Now, even before all the changes, it was contentious if this team benefited more than Tribbie over Robin. As while Tribbie's follow-ups did funnel Fei Xiao very well, the pure single target nature of the team meant that a lot of Tribbie's utility was just being ignored. Now, after the changes, I would say that Tribbie is less than a side grade to Robin. So, as has become a theme in this video, she will still be good with them, but she is not their best in slot. I'll also say that everyone here gets at least something unique from the additional follow-ups from Tribbie, as Numby gets additional action advancing and Mosey gets additional talent stacks, and both of these are pretty big deals for them. It's like having a second, more consistent Aventurine on your team in terms of follow-up support. In terms of being a fun team member, Tribbie will fit the squad pretty well, meta or otherwise. I will be the first person to say that while Robin is strong, she can be a bit frustrating to play around sometimes with her strict energy requirements. So if you are as sick of Robin as I am after mentioning her 30 times in this video, Tribbie might be your solution. But at least for here, don't use her expecting a genuine upgrade. Before we go further, I just want to say that this tier list format will be a mainstay on my channel for the foreseeable future. So if you like what you see here, and you also want to see coverage of, sus upcoming content, then make sure to subscribe. Alright, back to the video. Now let's move to probably the biggest question of this video. What about the Herda? Well, it's time for your favorite answer, it depends. For slow ulting teams, like with Jade or Mini Herda as the sub DPS, there isn't really much lost here from that nerf, as Tribbie likely won't miss many follow-ups compared to before. But that team composition was not her strength. Her strength was with Argenti or Serval as the sub DPS, so that the massive ult and follow-up spamming would ultra-charge the Herda. And in that regard, yeah, things are much worse. Now, even before the nerf, the Herda was doing more personal damage with Robin rather than Tribbie. What made Tribbie close that gap was her own personal damage as well as her unique energy funneling capabilities that Robin could not match. Tribbie gives a lot of stats that the Herda wants. Thanks to a lot of the Herda's self-buffing in attack and crit, Respen and vulnerability works very well for her as a baseline to try and compete with Robin. And the focused single target damage onto the BVS target, paired with her spammy follow-ups to funnel her energy, made this pairing seem very, very strong. to where there was some early speculation that this would be a quintessential pairing on the same tier as Jiaoshu and Acheron. After all the changes, she is still a very strong option, but even a slight downgrade will make the ever-approaching Robin, or Sunday or RMC, seem all the more plausible as alternatives. I will say that, in general, Tribbie is still the Herda's best in slot teammate, but in teams that specifically really enjoy Robin, like with Jade, Lingsha, or again with Mini Herda, Robin can still compete very well. Those follow-up units will also help Tribbie with their AoE attacks, so we're back to square one with Robin and Tribbie both being very synergistic with the same units. I don't think that one unit over the other will make that much of a difference in your scoring. Tribbie will deal more damage, while Robin will have more action value leniency when it comes to staying in a cycle or getting a better score in Apocalyptic Shadow. In the end, this really just comes down to how important it is to free Robin for your other team, which I don't want to downplay, as that is a genuinely good boon to have. If we aren't talking about Robin, but instead if we are comparing Tribbie to RMC or Sunday, then it's a bit more clear that Tribbie is the best option out there. As while their action advancing is sorely missed, Tribbie with DDD spamming can overtake them with her much better interpretation stack generation. And if your team is struggling too much with Robin's ult up time, then Tribbie's more consistent buffing will win in the end no matter what. But the main thing that I want to say is that in any of these situations, she isn't a home run that knocks everyone else out of the water. She just competes. She wins the competition a lot of the time, and she is competing against some of the best units in the game, but this is no Acheron Jiaoshu or Firefly Ron Mei situation. It's a very strong pairing, but not one that I would ever call necessary. In this same vein, I am willing to also put Jade in this high tier. Her slow ult and frequent AoE follow-ups work very well with her, and generally Tribbie is pretty good at buffing dual DPS teams, thanks to her buffs counting down on her own turns. And if you have 2 DPS benefiting from her buffs, then in a way that's double the mileage that you're getting out of her. For that same reasoning, I'll also put Mini Herda up here. These two units both help Tribbie a lot through her new energy trace, so there is a lot of genuine synergy here. Serval goes to the tier below, as while her consistent AoE attacks with her ultimate do something for Tribbie, that inherent synergy that they had before is just not there anymore. So, by now, you can probably get the flow of how she works with the average carry, which means that things can go by a bit faster. Seeley, Dill, Jingliu, Qingque, Jingyuan, they all usually want one support that makes them function at a baseline, but as a secondary support, Tribbie doesn't do a bad job by any means. Her generalized buffs also do help out with dot teams, and while she is still behind Ron Mei in that support slot, she is actually ahead of Robin here for what that's worth. Now we get to the tier where units need something really specific from their supports that Tribbie just does not have. This also goes for some of the carries in the above tier, but here it's debilitating enough to be a genuine problem. Aglaia really needs energy funneling and action advancing, which Tribbie has neither of. Yes, her damage is nice, but I would say RMC is generally better here. I will point out that the joint attack in Aglaia's enhanced basic does double dip in Tribbie's energy and additional damage, but that more so just helps Tribbie feel strong rather than making her a better support for Aglaia specifically. If you are going sustainless Aglaia and your other supports or premium options can already shore up what she needs, then sure, Tribbie can be a fine damage amper. But for most players and teams, I think she deserves to be placed here. Acheron needs 2 Nihilde characters. Maybe at E2 Acheron or in a sustainless team, this can work well due to Acheron enjoying the single target additional damage, but for most people, again, the synergy is just not there. Ratio is here for the same reason. He wants debuffs as well as energy funneling to spam his ultimate, so while he does enjoy the damage amping despite being single target, it's not really gonna work too well for him in the end. I will say that for basically any unit on this tier, an E1 Tribbie can overcome these weaknesses to be worth slotting in anyways. If you can stack Acheron stacks enough already with, say, a Jiaoshu, then an E1 Tribbie will be very good for her damage. Really, with E1 Tribbie, this whole list changes, as it's an utterly insane Eidolon that really helps the overkilling AoE squad like Yunli, Argenti, the Herda, or Acheron. This list is mostly assuming a cheaply invested in Tribbie, but as is the case with every unit, the more you invest into them, the more they become best in slots due to just having more utility. And E1 Tribbie is probably the most extreme example of that in the entire game. Himiko might like her depending on the enemy composition, but usually you want Ranmei, Fugue, or both of them to get the most out of her breaks and follow-ups. Who knows, if there are fire and quantum weak enemies at the same time, then maybe I could see something work here, but otherwise I'm not too keen on this. And then we have every break DPS, while also counting Sushang and Shui in that category. Again, Tribbie's generalized buffs work as well for them as they do for the dot team that's above them on this list. But unlike the dot team, these break carries really want the weakness break efficiency, super break, and exo toughness that their supports usually bring for them. I'd almost put them all in the same tier as Kafka and Black Swan since it is technically a case where they benefit from her, but instead of it just being a damage loss against her supporting competition, it's more of a loss of functionality in the comp itself. If you are dead set on it, then you can probably make it work, but expect it to be a bit of an uphill battle. And then we have every other carry or sub DPS in the game. Not because they don't synergize with her in any way, but because that synergy still doesn't produce anything that workable. I said earlier that I was not regarding the power level of a unit on this list, but that is only true to an extent. This tier list is a two-way street, with a carry getting something from Tribbie and Tribbie getting something from the carry. The carry has to provide some amount of usefulness for them to be on this list. If a carry in this bottom tier quote works well with Tribbie, but you still can't clear with them in under 5 cycles, then can you really say that they work well with her? Maybe. I mean, you can disagree with my criteria, or how I'm judging these units, like specifically maybe Sampo or Gwenhyphen, but this is how it's made sense in my head, so we'll have to agree to disagree. Next, let's talk about the rest of the cast to see if they have any unique interactions with her that are notable. First off, Lingshaw, Aventurine, and Gallagher synergize well with her thanks to her new third trace. Frequent AoE attacks are the name of the game to help keep her in check, and Gallagher's Quid Pro Quo procs can also help out in this regard. This niche also applies to Fugue and Jiaoshu for their blast attacks and AoE ultimates, although for both of them that means that both of your supports are doing nothing but buffing numbers, which can be iffy depending on the carry. RMC also works well with her in the same way that they do with the Herda, with Mem's AoE attacks and ultimates. There are also like 1,000 other supports that have AoE ultimates or bounce attacks. There's no real way to tier them since they all just do the same thing. And I mean, one AoE attack every couple of turns doesn't really constitute any synergy in my book, so just know that they're okay with her, but not in any cool or unique way. You know what, I'll just put them in their own tier at the bottom, just for completion's sake. And in terms of the other supports, well, anything that results in more AoE hits, like action advancing or energy funneling, benefits her in some way if you really think about it. So Robin, Sunday, Bronya, Sparkle, you can go to the second highest tier, and Tingyun and Ho-Ho can join them too. And for the last tier, we have units that I really have nothing special to say about. If you want to argue that I'm once again snubbing Hanya here because making the carry faster means more attacks, then go for it. But, shit. I guess that means I do have something to say about her, so here. Everyone else, into the nothing tier at the bottom. Alright, well, going into it, I really didn't expect to tier literally every unit in the game, but I guess this means that the amount of fringe what-if questions should be at least a bit mitigated. Please note that all of this is with pre-release theory crafting and number crunching. So if you disagree with things, or if things turn out differently when she comes out, then that is at least partially to be expected with this type of speculative content. Use your own judgment at the end of the day with all of this. I'm just a guy on the internet who likes to think about this game, but if you think that I'm wrong about something here, then that's fair enough. I'll also say, to be fair to Tribbie, that all of this comparing is through comparing her to the literal best units in the game. And so while a lot of the time she does not win that comparison, her competing at all gives her a lot of merit in the meta. Alright, that's enough prefacing. With that, make sure to subscribe and drop by when I'm live. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye! Crit damage. Oh, crit damage. Full send it. Okay. Alright. Fuck me, I guess. My bad. My bad. Actually, that's my bad. Now that I've taken like 5 seconds to think about it, that's on me. That's on me.